A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Now, in just a few weeks, it will be the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or the war in Ukraine. Government officials have been calling attention to Russia's plans to launch a major offensive in the country on that day. President Volodymyr Zelensky has called for more weapons for the battlefront as the war reportedly gets tougher as we approach the anniversary. We'll have a report on the latest developments and then later be speaking with head of the Department of International Relations at Bayes University, Dr. Adoyi Omale, on the developments. Plus, the U.S. shooting down what is believed to be a Chinese spy balloon floating in its airspace. China, however, said there was no cause for alarm. Could this be a security breach, or did the U.S. make a mistake? That's Diplomatic Channel this week. Let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles, and we'll be right back.
President Muhammadu Buhari has conferred the title of Ambassador in situ to 115 foreign officers for their contributions to the nation's development and economy. The letters were presented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Geoffrey Onyoma, on behalf of the President to the serving officers who had attained the rank of Deputy Director as at Friday, February the 3rd. He said the President was recognizing and honoring the Foreign Service officers for their sacrifice, hard work and role in attracting foreign investment to grow the nation's economy. Pope Francis brought his tour of Africa to an end on Sunday. Ending in South Sudan, the Pope called on the people to resist the venom of hatred so they could achieve the peace and prosperity that have eluded them through years of bloody ethnic conflicts. The 86-year-old Pope wove his homily around the themes that have dominated his trip to the world's newest nation: reconciliation and mutual forgiveness for past wrongs. Many in the crowd sang and drummed as the Pope entered the dusty area. Eastern African regional leaders have renewed their call for an immediate ceasefire by all sides in the conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo that pits the country's military against a rebel group it has accused Rwanda of supporting. During a summit in Bujumbura, the Burundian capital, the leaders of the regional East African Community Bloc called for an immediate ceasefire by all parties. Stories will communicate issues at the end of the meeting.
NATO allies are preparing weapons for Ukraine as the battle toughens, with Russia increasing bombardment on the country in the weeks running up until the first anniversary of the war. Now, according to the Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, the country is set to receive 120 to 140 tanks in the first wave of deliveries from a coalition of 12 countries. But countries have been dragging their feet on the delivery of F-16 fighter jets.
Що конкретно ми домовились сьогодні? Є розуміння, що почати переговори про членство України.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said the situation on the front lines of eastern Ukraine was getting tougher and Russia was throwing more and more troops into battle. Russian forces are slowly gaining ground in the Donbass region, encircling the city of Bakhmut, north of Donetsk, and battling to take control of a nearby road which is a major supply route for Ukrainian forces. They're also trying to capture Volda, southwest of Donetsk. His comments come as Russia and Ukraine traded almost 200 prisoners of war in a swap announced separately by both sides on Saturday. A video uploaded on social media by Ukrainian authorities on Saturday purportedly showed the Ukrainian released prisoners returning on buses and posing for pictures upon their arrival. Also on social media, the Ukrainian Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak, said 116 Ukrainians had been returned, while the Russian news agency cited Moscow's defense ministry saying 63 Russian prisoners of war had been freed. And the bodies of British volunteer aid workers Andriy Backshaw and Chris Parry had been sent back to Ukraine. Backshaw and Parry were killed during an attempted humanitarian evacuation in eastern Ukraine in January, Parry's family had said previously. Meanwhile, Donetsk, in the Russian-controlled part of Ukraine, came under fire on Saturday, damaging an apartment block in the center of the city. Several homes were severely damaged and the body of a local resident was found under debris. Two Russian missiles also hit the center of Kharkiv on Sunday morning, with one of the missiles striking a university building. The strike destroyed several floors of the University of Urban Economy, located in Kharkiv's historical center. The director, Volodymyr Babayev, said it was not the first attack on the campus. One local resident who had been living inside an apartment block that was hit said she survived after furniture fell onto her. Ukraine's defense minister Oleksiy Reznikov said on Sunday Ukraine expects a possible major Russian offensive this month, but that Kyiv has reserves to hold back Moscow's forces even though the latest Western military supplies will not arrive in time. He told a news conference Russia could launch the attack for symbolic reasons around the first anniversary of the invasion, but its resources are not ready from a military point of view. Reznikov said the offensive would most likely be launched in the east, where Russia is trying to capture all the heavily industrialized Donbass region, or the south, where it wants to widen its land corridor to the occupied peninsula of Crimea. He estimated that Russia has 12,000 troops in Belarusian military bases, a number that would not be enough to launch a significant attack from Belarus into Ukraine's north, reopening a new front. Apart from sending military equipment, the U.S., through its Attorney General Merrick Garland, said the country would also be making the first ever transfer of forfeited Russian assets to help rebuild war-ravaged Ukraine. He made the announcement in Washington alongside Ukraine's Prosecutor General Andrei Kostin.
I am announcing that I have authorized the first ever transfer of forfeited Russian assets for use in Ukraine. These forfeited assets follow the announcement I made last April of the indictment of designated Russian oligarch Konstantin Malafeyev on charges of sanctions evasions. At that time, I also announced the seizure of millions of dollars from an account of a U.S. financial institution traced to Malafeyev's sanctions evasions.
Ukraine remains determined to join the EU still, despite warnings it could take a number of years.
We are witnessing the authorization of transfer of the confiscated assets in the amount of $5.4 million to the State Department for the purpose of rebuilding war-ravaged Ukraine.
President Zelensky says it will be possible for Ukraine to start EU accession negotiations this year, as there is an understanding it will be possible, despite no assurances of a fast-track membership. I want to bring in now the head of International Relations Department at Bayes University in Abuja, Dr. Adoyi Omale. He joins us from our studios in Abuja as well. Dr. Omale, thank you for joining me on the program today.
Yeah, good evening, and I'm happy to be here on Channels Television.
Happy to have you. We're nearing the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine, and fears are growing that Russia is planning a major offensive. Do you think that this attack is inevitable?
Well, I think that Russia is getting very much agitated. They never believed that this war was going to stretch this long. And so they are going to be very desperate going forward. They underestimated the capacity of Ukraine and the international community to withstand their onslaught. Don't forget that it was just a minor military operation, and it has now dragged for close to a year, almost a year now.
Yes, indeed it has, and there's been a lot of military spending. But you know, the reason why I'm asking this question is if an attack is inevitable is because the Ukrainian government says there's a major attack that Russia is planning, and this is coming on the first anniversary, which is February 24. What do you make of that exactly, and what would the point be for Russia with this major offensive?
Yes, I think the Russians now are, it's now a matter of also pride, and their reputation is also at stake. The whole world are looking forward to how they are going to respond to the challenges that they are having in penetrating and winning the war. So much has been put into this war, so much casualties on both sides. And the earlier the Russians try and wrap up or completely pull out, the better. Don't forget that the international community, the UN, has passed resolution condemning the attack. And I think there are a lot of pressure on the Russians to quickly wrap up this war, especially the impact of the war on the global economic system. And I believe that this attack that President Zelensky has talked about stems from intelligence that have been gathered. And my advice to the parties is to go back to the table, because outright hostility going forward will not be helpful to the entire world.
As I mentioned before, there's been a lot of military spending by NATO allies, and more military equipment is heading towards Ukraine, should be arriving any time now. How much longer do you think the countries can keep this up? And I ask this because of a report in the UK around last week that the military status of the country is falling, and that's probably because it's been preoccupied with supplying Ukraine with weapons.
Well, the weapons are coming in. Recently, the HIMARS anti-missiles were given to Ukraine, tanks, ballistic missiles, and so on, air defense systems have been provided to Ukraine. And the Ukraine's capacity to continue to withstand Russian onslaughts have been greatly enhanced by these weapons that have been provided by the West. And the more the war continues to drag, the more the West are determined to assist Ukraine in this battle. I don't know what efforts, enough effort has not been put in terms of the negotiations and diplomatic effort to resolve this crisis. I am not satisfied with the efforts that have been made. There have been attempts to try, but at least more effort needs to be put in that direction. The support that the West is giving to Ukraine is further boosting Ukraine's confidence, and the Russians should know that this war is not just the war between them and Ukraine, but also the war between the West and Russia and their allies.
You could be right there, but the Russian president is infuriated by all of these weapons that are coming towards Ukraine. I remember at the start of the war, he did warn that anyone who intervenes in this war, who interferes, beg your pardon, would also taste Russia's wrath. And then now he's also warning nations against providing Ukraine with weapons, as supposes that they're fighting this war by proxy. Is it possible, that the war could go beyond Ukraine eventually, as we enter the first year of the war and possibly a second?
Well, my understanding of the conflict is just about the struggle for influence within the sub-region, within the region of Ukraine. And I understand that the West is taking this thing very, very important, because if Russia succeeds in annexing Ukraine or in winning this war, it will be a serious dent on the capacity of the West, or the West attempt to spread its influence to that region of Europe. And NATO, being what I know of them, will do everything within their power to ensure that Ukraine wins this war. And with the support that they are pumping to Ukraine, you will know that they are very determined to support Ukraine to the end. And I think that statesmen and leaders of the world should do something quickly, so that the war do not escalate to maybe the use of nuclear weapons and other more destructive weapons.
We'll take a break now. Diplomatic Channel continues in a moment. Stay with us. So clearly, negotiation is important. They had to get back to diplomatic negotiations, but no one is focused on that now. All the focus is on military aid for Ukraine, which is infuriating Russia, which is also possibly prolonging this war because as the weapons are being supplied to Ukraine, Russia is also building up its own military capability to fight back. How exactly do you think that nations will be able to bring Russia to the table? Because in the end, NATO and the EU, continental bodies and international bodies, were not willing to grant Ukraine membership. So even their support for Ukraine is limited.
Well, the reasons Russia is giving for this invasion, to some of the reasons are just not there. For example, the issue of Nazification of Ukraine by the current leadership in Ukraine. I don't think it holds waters because I don't see any sign of Nazism in the Zelensky government or in the government of Ukraine. So that accusation by Russia does not really hold water. Don't forget that Zelensky himself is Jewish, has Jewish blood. So I don't know why Russia will use that as an excuse or as a propaganda to say that. But if Russia is trying to reduce the influence of Western nations in Ukraine, fine. You can't keep a scorpion in your pocket and close to you. It will definitely sting you. So to that extent, they are resisting. So what will facilitate this negotiation is for everybody to return to the status quo before the war. Russia pulls out in line with UN resolution, in line with the decision of the International Court of Justice, pull out of Ukraine, and then Zelensky and Ukraine also should should put on hold their joining of NATO, and then that will facilitate them going to the negotiation table to resolve these issues. I think all wars, not just the Ukrainian war, all wars eventually end on the negotiation table. And that is why I am still admonishing that the United Nations and other interested parties within the international system should do more. Yes, sanctions have been placed on Russia by a lot of countries and by a lot of countries, and sanction alone will not solve this problem now. The world need to sit down after 1 year now to take stock, and then all the parties will have to revert back, create an atmosphere that they hope the parties can sit down on the negotiation table and try to resolve this matter. It's not doing the world any good.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omale, for joining me on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you very much.
The U.S. on Saturday shot down a suspected Chinese spy balloon off the coast of South Carolina a week after it first entered U.S. airspace and triggered a dramatic and public spy saga with China, of course. What has been China's response to this, and what does it mean for U.S.-China relations? Well, let's hope in this report can explain some of the questions.
A U.S. military fighter jet shot down the suspected Chinese spy balloon off the coast of South Carolina on Saturday, just a week after it entered U.S. airspace and triggered a dramatic and public spying saga that worsened Sino-U.S. relations. The balloon was shot down about 6 nautical miles off the U.S. coast over relatively shallow water, potentially aiding efforts to recover elements of the Chinese surveillance equipment in the coming days. The shoot-down came shortly after the U.S. government ordered a halt to flights in and out of 3 regional airports, Wilmington, Myrtle Beach, and Charleston. Due to what it said at the time was undisclosed national security effort, the flights resumed Saturday afternoon. Multiple fighter and refueling aircraft were involved in the mission, but only one, an F-22 fighter jet, took the shot using AIM-9X missile. The balloon first entered the U.S. identification zone on January the 28th, entered Canadian airspace 3 days later, and re-entered U.S. airspace on January the 31st. US President Joe Biden said on Saturday he had told the Pentagon on Wednesday to shoot down the balloon as soon as possible and lauded those who did so on Saturday.
On Wednesday, when I was briefed on the balloon, I ordered the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible. They decided, without doing damage to anyone on the ground, they decided that the best time to do that was when we got over water outside within 12-mile limit. They successfully took it down, and I want to compliment our aviators who did it, and we'll have more to report on this a little later. Thank you.
Mr. President, what did you say about China? What's your message to China?
You were saying the recommendation was from your national
I told them to shoot it down on Wednesday.
这里是正在直播的中国新闻。首先来。
But China strongly condemned the military on an airship it says was used for meteorological and other scientific purposes, and which it said had strayed into US airspace completely accidentally. But there was no mention of it on the state television CCTV news bulletins the whole day, including the headline news, which focused on the celebration on the last day of the Lunar New Year. One photographer who witnessed the shooting of the balloon describes what he saw.
I mean, I guess, because, I mean, you don't know what's in there, right? So whenever you pop the balloon, what's inside of it? You know, what could possibly come out of it? What, you know, I mean, I don't know. You know, if it's not so dangerous, why didn't they do it somewhere out in like some remote area or something? But, I mean, I understand why it would be over the ocean, less impact to nature, wildlife, stuff like that. And people, obviously. But there is a lot of open land still that they could have tried.
Other onlookers also reacted to the downing of the balloon.
We came here to the parking lot and then saw the balloon up ahead, up high, and then we probably watched it, I don't know, maybe about 5 minutes, and then started seeing some jet trails coming from the west, and one in particular all of a sudden seemed like it was coming fast and coming straight towards the balloon. And from there, suddenly we saw something take off from the jet and knew it was a missile. And you could see the explosion. Didn't hear anything, but saw the explosion of the balloon. And it seemed like it started falling apart and starting to come down. And now it's just drifting out to the ocean. Hard to see anymore. Yeah, it's still out there though.
Gosh, it was almost like a moving cloud coming down. And then the smoke was gone and it just started slowly going down, but further out towards the ocean. Yeah. But it was a great experience.
I think it's terrible that they let it get this far to start with. And what I've heard, there's more and more of them. So how many did the Chinese actually put out? And what's exactly on it? Is it just devices to check, I don't know, our airspace, our military movement and everything? So it's scary. I mean, it's a different way of spying on us, let's put it that way.
Analysts had opinions on the balloon's appearance in the US airspace.
It is quite a provocative move. I mean, I think at this point, intentional or whether China intentionally sent this over the U.S. Over U.S. territory or not is irrelevant. I think the damage is done in the sense that the U.S. got a front row seat to what China is doing to the U.S. as far as intelligence gathering is concerned, and also what it's willing to do, because it's quite, your everyday Americans were able to see, they got quite a personal view of China's spying program, being able to like physically see it in the air, and it loitered for, as you know, several days. So I think from a public perspective and public opinion point of view, is tremendously damaging to the U.S.-China relationship, because it showed the extent of China's spying program and what they're willing to do to gather intelligence from the United States.
Senior fellow at the Asia Society Policy Institute, Lyle Morris, said the balloon was a provocative move by China and is tremendously damaging to the U.S.-China relationship.
The bigger intelligence gain is on the response. Just how would the United States, when would they detect something? When would they start to act like they've detected something? What would they do about the detection of something? Because what we're talking about is operational intelligence that could be useful for wartime. And so this is what is done in intelligence in general, both by intelligence services and by the militaries. you test these response times. And we've seen from the Chinese in recent years the use of the kind of balloons over Taiwan, near Japan, near Korea. So it's not that unusual.
And that's Diplomatic Channel this week. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget you can watch this and all other episodes in our youtube.com/channels web channel. You can look for Diplomatic Channel in the playlist and watch them all over again. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.